Good evening, everybody. You're very welcome to our talk this evening. My name is Louise Doyle. I'm one of the lecturers in mental health here at the School of Nursing and Midwifery. I'd like to give you a big welcome to our talk this evening on this really gorgeous day. It's really great that you could come in and make it with us. Just to give you a very quick outline of just where the fire exits are in case there was any problems. We don't foresee any. So one down here and two at the back should the fire alarm go off. We are obviously hoping that doesn't happen. So I'd like to introduce you this evening to our speaker, who's Dr. Theo Stickley. Theo is an Associate Professor of Mental Health in the University of Nottingham, and he's going to talk to us this evening about the really interesting issue of creativity in mental health care. Now, Theo's going to talk for about 40 minutes, and then he's going to allow some time for questions. So if you have any burning questions, we'll have a roving mic and we'll be able to take them at the end of this session. So, ladies and gentlemen, if I can introduce Dr. Theo Stickley.
Bear with me, I'm just sorting out my technology. What an absolutely fantastic day it's been. Is it always like this in Ireland? Well, I was walking down a street and it's called Grafton Street. Yep, all know Grafton Street. And I went into a shop and bought something and made sure I had lots of change because there were so many buskers that I wanted to give a bit to everybody, especially the performing ones, because I always support the arts. I hope you do when you're walking on Grafton Street. But there was this one guy who was sitting there on a little stool and he had a typewriter and it said, "A poem on any subject, pay what you can." So I thought, brilliant, here's an opportunity. So I said to him, "Look, I've been invited to give a talk tonight at the university on the subject of arts and mental health, and I've come from England to give this talk." I said, "Can you write a poem about that?" And he said, "Yes, of course, come back in 3 minutes." So I did. So I'm going to start this evening with a very short poem by one Stephen Clare, 17th of June, 2014. And this poem is called Arts and Mental Health. Distress dripping down canvas slow in a sweet release through medium, as though the spirits and demons of the mind are leaving their cage to walk the earth in poetry, music, art. This leads to a stranger from a strange land coming over to warn us of this otherworldly awakening, to talk to us the benefits of harmony, the healing power of expression. Isn't that lovely? Let's give him a round of applause, shall we? And before I get my aeroplane back tomorrow, I'll go back to Grafton Street tomorrow morning and see if he's there and tell him that he got a big round of applause. Thank you for the welcome, Louise. And also a big thank you to Professor Agnes Higgins, whose idea it was for me to give this lecture. She cannot be here this evening as she's away on university business, so either she trusts me implicitly to get on with it, or she just didn't want to hear my talk. Anyway, I have to be careful what I'm saying because I believe it's being recorded, and this evening's talk will be available on the university website sometime afterwards. I think it would be a good idea to introduce myself before I introduce my topic. Firstly, I want to give some of my credentials for this talk tonight. Firstly, I'm a mental health nurse and I have been for 20 years. Any other mental health nurses in the audience? Just a few. Hey, have we got any student nurses? Student mental health nurses or any student nurses? None at all, not to worry. Well, I'm wondering who on earth you all are then. And for the whole of the last 20 odd years, I've been involved in arts and mental health in both practice and more recently in research. I coordinate the seminar series for arts, health and well-being in the UK, and it's funded by one of the UK government research councils. I've published lots on arts and health. I know you can't read it, but it's just to give you an idea. All of these publications are about arts and health, probably half of them specifically about the arts and mental health. I've even published a book on the topic. Not that I'm a book salesman or anything, but you will notice lots of leaflets. And I have brought 2 along. If anybody wants a signed copy, €25. I'll even personalise the message afterwards. So do grab me if you'd like to buy one, but it is available. Preferably don't get it off that horrible company called Amazon, because they sell loads and loads of books in the UK and they pay minimal tax in Ireland. So order it from the publisher. They're a great mental health publisher in the UK. So that's the sales pitch. And so that's me as an academic and a nurse. But I'd like to tell you something about me as a person. I want to tell you something of my story. And I want to share, first of all, the most significant influences in my life that have made me the person that I am today. And these are the 3 biggest influences. Firstly, I had a loving and stable upbringing. As it happens, my parents quite literally met on the stage. So creativity has been a feature in my upbringing. At a very young age, you can imagine me probably about 6 or 7, while my parents were singing the songs from The Sound of Music and Mary Poppins. I was one of those children that got dragged around singing, "Doe, a deer, a female deer." And that was the nature of my upbringing, very, very creative. And I want to emphasise that I had what I've referred to as a values-based upbringing. And it was a very moral upbringing. We were taught to respect others in our upbringing, my brothers and I, to consider everybody as equal. And it was a very values-based upbringing, but also a very working-class upbringing. And I've put, just as a by-the-by, obviously what's had a big influence on me is my own life experiences. So I'm going to talk about those as well. But these 3 points I'm going to come back to throughout my talk, because for me, each of the 3 points are significant for arts and health work. So I'll come back to these 3 points. So, this is the website that you may have come across that advertised this lecture. So I want to talk a bit about how I became who I am today. My story in relation to mental health starts when I was a teenager. I was at school, and a friend of mine, let's call her Bridget, had at the time what was referred to as a mental breakdown. She was 17 as well, under a lot of pressure from her parents to do well with her A-levels. And I visited Bridget on an acute ward in Essex, where I lived at the time, and she'd been sectioned under the Mental Health Act. Now, Bridget firmly believed she was the Virgin Mary and that she could fly, and her mind was racing. And she had a real heightened sense of awareness of absolutely everything that was going on. And it was clear as she was talking, I could almost see her flying around the room. Now, as I said, I was 17 at the time, and I confess I was a bit of a hippie. So I had long hair, and I can remember thinking, wow, Bridget is closer to reality than anyone else I know. So I was fascinated by what had happened to her, and curious how it had happened, and interested in what needed to happen to help sort her out, really. Fast forward 15 years, and in the mid-80s, I was a businessman. I was a corporate finance broker, a director of 4 companies, managing director of 1, married with 3 young children. I was a deacon of a local church, the one that I'd grown up in. But towards the end of that decade, my world fell apart. First of all, my wife had an affair with another man. And then towards the end of the 1980s, all my businesses completely collapsed. I was personally liable for about £500,000 that I owed Lloyd's Bank, which I couldn't pay. And believe you me, £500,000 in the 1980s was a lot of money. So at the time, I lost my house, my 2 cars, I lost my job, and eventually I became divorced. So this time of my life was a great turning point. I began to start counselling on a weekly basis because I felt as if I'd lost control of who I was. I had a real crisis in my identity. Everything that was solid seemed to have collapsed, and I had emotionally and psychologically collapsed with it. I went to counselling for, actually, off and on, it was 9 years. But I knew at that time, towards the end of the 1980s, the beginning of the 1990s, I don't know if there was a great recession here, there certainly was in the UK at that time, as bad as the one that we've recently experienced. But I knew inside myself that I would come through the difficult time. And as I gradually became more self-aware, I realised that I was actually relieved to let go of that former identity, especially of a businessman and a church deacon. With business, I realised I felt tired, what felt like having to kind of lie and cheat to make money. So ethically, I'd felt compromised, and it was a great relief in a way to let all that go. And my faith was challenged as well. And eventually, gradually it was, that I let go of those strong beliefs that I had, the religious beliefs. So quite almost penniless, really, I was glad that I had an opportunity for a new beginning. So in about the summer of 1990, I was painting a friend's kitchen, and she had a radio on, really loud, and it was commercial radio. And a big voice said, "Now is the time to get into nursing." And I tingled all down my back. And I remembered Bridget from when I was 17 years old. And it was like God spoke to me. It really was, this big loud voice. Because I believed in that moment my destiny had been sealed. I would become a mental health nurse. And so I pursued that goal and applied to Nottingham to do my training. And I left behind my previous life. I relocated to a new city. I became divorced. And I trained in both mental health nursing, and I also did a counselling diploma. Because of all the counselling that I had, I decided I wanted to be a counsellor as well. In my nurse education, I absolutely loved it. And I loved the learning, but most of all, I loved spending time with people who reminded me of Bridget all those years before. And what I loved doing is stopping and just listening to people tell their stories. And that's what I did for the most of my 3 years training. But what I also did was I did a lot of poetry, drama, singing, painting, and even the occasional unconventional dancing, all sorts. And when I qualified as a nurse, I worked in a residential rehabilitation unit for people with a diagnosis of schizophrenia. And it was here that I was permitted to develop these creative ideas. And I set up groups, and I worked with people individually, and we generally had a great time. And I worked in that environment for 8 years. But during that 8 years, I realised that there was very little in Nottingham that people could engage with once they were discharged from our unit. So I helped to set up an Arts on Prescription programme, and that commenced in 2004, and it's running to this day. And around that time, I also became full-time in the university, and so for the last 10 years, I've been focusing my research as well as supporting practice in arts and health, hence my publications. So this is the story that I wanted to tell you before I started to talk about my topic and the research. What I'd like to say, because I gave you my credentials earlier with my academic persona, but I wanted to share my personal story with you because that is also my credentials to talk about this topic tonight. A few minutes ago, I referred to my upbringing when I said I had a loving, stable upbringing, I had a values-based upbringing, I had a working-class upbringing. In turn, I've been greatly influenced, so the three attributes I bring to this work are, I love people. That's my starting point. And that in all the work I do, I believe I am led, or I try as hard as I can to be led by my values. And thirdly, I recognise injustice and oppression, and I want to do something about it. So these aren't only attributes, but these are what motivates me to do the work that I do. So let's think about some good arts and health work before we think about mental health specifically. Now, hope the technology works. This isn't about arts and health or arts and mental health at all. I just want you to watch this YouTube clip. Relax and pay attention, okay? Okay, so come on. Isn't that just wonderful? So, if we think about what we've seen, and I know it is an advert, I acknowledge that. There's something very poignant about it was the little girl with a coin that started the whole thing. Isn't that tremendous power? And this gradual revelation that something is happening, something is going on here. The joy between the musicians and the novelty of the cellist in the evening dress, but then everybody else, all the participants in ordinary clothing. Obviously, the pure quality of the performance, the smiles on people's faces, and it's all so unexpected. People join in, they conducted, they laughed, they sang, they danced. A beautiful shared experience is created in the community. Grandparents with children alike share and enjoy. Everyone is left with the feeling that they've been part of something special. Now, if we understand some of these basic principles, I think that this is a good starting point for thinking about creativity in mental health. What I'm not talking about this evening is therapy, and what I'm not talking about is medical outcomes. What I am talking about this evening is simply working in creative ways with people experiencing mental distress in order for people to have some enjoyment. Maybe for some people to feel better about themselves. Maybe for some people to build some confidence in what they can do. And for some people to make new friends. For others to go to college or university. And for many people, certainly in the work that we've been doing in Nottingham, a sense of belonging in society and a sense of a strengthened identity. Now, I know that there is already some terrific work going on in Ireland. Anybody here from Arts and Health? And some superb work that's been published. It's a recent publication in The Lancet, no less. Very impressive. On classical music with stroke patients in the Talent Hospital here in Dublin. And also, anyone here from Arts and Minds? Hello. We'll have a chat afterwards. So I do acknowledge that there is some work going on, some great work going on in Ireland. But all around the world, arts and health is being practiced. I've just got a list of examples here from the research literature from Australia, Denmark, Scotland, Norway, Finland, Canada, Mexico, Sweden, United States of America, and of course I could go on and on. Now, I suspect that because you're here this evening, you've got an interest in this topic, and you might be wondering, why isn't this work more mainstream, more normal in mental health? And so, for the rest of the time, that's what I want to look at and begin to answer that question, why. And I'm going to suggest three things that gets in the way. Firstly, it's the medical model. Secondly, is evidence-based medicine. And thirdly, excuses. So I'm going to take these one at a time. So firstly, the medical model, I believe, has a grip in mental health care, a grip on how things are done. And we all know what I mean by the medical model. People act in certain ways that they're deemed to be symptoms of an illness. And because people have symptoms that correspond to diagnoses of mental disorder, they are diagnosed. And if a person has any kind of illness, then society has a duty to treat the person's illness. And in psychiatry, that treatment normally equals some form of medication and often confinement and coercion. But what we do know in psychiatry for sure is that medication tends to dull the senses in powerful ways. Now, don't get me wrong, medication can be useful for some people for some of the time. But I would argue that the great tragedy in psychiatry is that medication has, more often than not, historically been used for all the people, all the time. And if there's one thing that's guaranteed to dampen creativity, it's psychotropic medication. I would argue that the discipline of psychiatry, or the medical model, has very little to offer people with mental health problems in today's world, and certainly preventing mental health problems. Let's take an example of Ireland today. Some of you may be aware of this report that was published Christmas in 2013, so it's quite up to date, October 2013. Now, this is about the mental health of young people in Ireland. And just to give you a few highlights, it says that 1 in 5 young Irish people experience significant mental health problems. The findings of the report also indicate that high numbers of young adults between 19 and 24 are engaged in the misuse of alcohol and drugs, and of particular concern is that 3 out of 4 young adults meet the criteria for binge drinking. The research also reveals that 1 in 5 young people in Ireland have thought about suicide. Now, I want to pose a question, and it's great that this work is being done, but I want to, and it's a rhetorical question, what does the medical model have to offer young people in Ireland today to help prevent all of the above that I've talked about? Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that arts programs are going to solve all of these problems. But let's just think the budget for mental health in Ireland this year is about €733 million for the mental health service. But this has fallen from about €937 million in 2006. Now, I would argue just 1/4% would be enough to provide fantastic creative facilities and resources for Irish young people at risk of mental health problems. If we think about evidence-based medicine, I'm sure most of you are familiar with this kind of hierarchy of evidence, as it's referred to. And this is, the idea is that the gold standard are the RCTs and the systematic reviews of meta-analysis of RCTs and so on. Evidence is a very, very powerful word. Our entire justice system depends upon evidence. In a court of law, the agents of the state, the police, or you refer to them as Garda, have a duty to provide evidence to a court that a crime has been committed. In this sense, the concept of evidence is at the very heart of democracy. And similarly, if my father suffers a stroke, and he has done a few times, he's 86, and when he's taken into hospital, I will want to know that he's given the best treatment. And that best treatment depends on the best research evidence that's available to inform that treatment. But the reason I want to challenge evidence-based medicine in my talk tonight isn't because I don't think that science has something to offer healthcare. Of course it does. The problem is when one model gains power over all the others. This is when there's a problem, and this is what has happened in healthcare. The medical model, together with the evidence-based medicine model, has become too big for its boots. Let me give an example. A woman I know is about 40 years old. Let's call her Carol. She drinks, she smokes, she has been promiscuous, and she has led a fairly transient lifestyle over the years. She's been given numerous mental health diagnoses, and I would argue that over the last 25 years, the medical model has been pretty useless for her, other than for providing her with a diagnosis so that she can claim state benefits. And these state benefits have kept her alive. But let's hear a bit more about Carol. When she was 3 years old, she was sexually abused by her stepfather, who also passed her around male members of his family for sexual gratification. In addition to this, she was frequently seriously beaten by her mother. Carol spent most of her subsequent childhood in residential care and has never held down a job in adulthood. The reason the medical model is fairly useless for Carol is because her problems are not and never have been medical. They have been entirely psychosocial. Therefore, medical treatments can never provide Carol solutions. Now, Carol came along to our Arts on Prescription programme, and while she was there, she met friendly people who didn't abuse her. She made friends with people from similar backgrounds who have also used the mental health system, and together they began to meet in one another's homes. They shared a love of music and the arts. And here's a quote from one of my research studies. It was only when I left school and I found out that I couldn't function. In actual fact, I was suicidal. Things started falling apart, you know. I was traumatised and I didn't see myself as part of the outside world. But at Arts on Prescription, I really enjoyed drawing and painting again, and that was something I'd forgotten, how much I enjoyed it. And then I realised I've got ability in those areas, and I just having stuff like that can make you feel good. I feel like that. I've some small place in the world for the first time, and that's really good. It's true. It's really true. It's 100% something I can actually feel a bit of pride in, that I've been part of, and it's good. The feeling that I actually belong, that this is a society that I do belong to. I'm a part of something that I've never had. So what I've done is I've given you an insight into the kind of research that I conduct as well, and it's called narrative inquiry. In this method, I ask people to tell their story of their lives or their engagement in an arts project or what art means to them. And in this sense, my research creates evidence, a lot of evidence. But in terms of those hierarchies of evidence, my research is at the bottom. Does this bother me? Well, no, not really, because I don't believe in the evidence-based medicine paradigm. In fact, I'd rather turn it on its head. Because what matters most to me in my life and in my research is what people say and the stories that they tell. So the third biggest barrier to arts and health working are the excuses, and some of those are related to what we've already discussed. Let's look at these one at a time. Firstly, there's a mountain of evidence that creative approaches to mental health care are effective. However, people are often looking for the wrong kind of evidence. The people in positions of power are often those who are programmed to look for the kind of evidence produced by randomised controlled trials. We're going to wait a very long time for that kind of evidence to be produced for participatory arts. Not because it's impossible to create that kind of evidence, but because health authorities and research councils are not inclined to fund such research studies. It's far cooler and sexier to fund research into neuroimaging of the brain than it is to fund research into, say, participatory dance. And there's a great hypocrisy in this argument that I'm raising. Let's imagine a powerful person running a multi-million-pound mental health budget whilst driving home listening to music. He may go to the ballet in the evening, have paintings on his wall at home, and he constantly appreciates the arts and culture, but ignores it for his own patients. And what would life be like without the arts? I think you'll agree, thoroughly miserable. In the current research literature on arts and mental health specifically, the outcomes are not hard, concrete ones. For example, if we spend 50,000 euros on a drama project, you'll save 100,000 euros on care. That kind of research doesn't exist in mental health. The evidence for arts and mental health at the present time is more focusing on what is referred to as soft outcomes, such as some of the things I mentioned earlier, increased confidence, making new friends, gaining a sense of belonging, and a stronger identity. Now let's think about money for a moment. Imagine somebody who might describe themselves as has been a revolving door patient for 10 years, in and out of mental health hospitals for maybe weeks, months at a time. Now, I've estimated for somebody like that, they will have cost the health service perhaps, let's say, €500,000 over the last 10 years or so. That might be a conservative estimate. Now, if over that 10-year period the health authority would have invested, let's say, that €500,000 in an arts programme, where a whole group of people have found a sense of community, made new friends, increased social support networks, took less medication, stayed out of hospital, and so on, the savings would be enormous in the long term. But research funders and health authorities are not programmed to think in those ways, and I suspect that the majority of mental health research funding in Ireland goes to a few senior researchers, normally called professors, looking for the gene for schizophrenia or whatever through neuroimages and genetic testing. Now, you remember I started my talk telling you about when I was a student nurse working creatively and practicing as a nurse. And the truth is, anybody who works in mental health, quick show of hands, good, a good number of us. Any of us, and I'm sure people do already, work in creative ways. And sometimes it's just about thinking outside of the square. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm not saying that we have to rely on highly trained and skilled individuals. We're not talking about art therapy here, but more about participatory, and I would argue democratic models. Sometimes, though, we can work with skilled artists who are values-led and who can work with mental health professionals to create programs of work at grassroots level, to bring about positive social change and also psychological change in people's lives. In other words, working with and in local communities to create programs not just for the middle classes to enjoy. My advice would be to focus them outside of the healthcare system and to be led within communities by people in those communities. So, in conclusion, I just thought I'd share some images from some of the work we've been doing over the years in various media. Oh, the guy in the red, that's my dad. I don't mean the guy in the red dress. I believe that historically there's been so much about psychiatry that has been inhuman. Whilst much good has been done, especially, I would say, by committed and caring, genuinely caring nurses. But historically, people have often experienced having their lives robbed from them by being locked up, drugged up, stigmatised, rejected, discriminated against. And then we wonder why the suicide rates are so high amongst people with mental health problems. Our work should be loving, values-led, and focusing on deprivation and inequality in society. In the UK, there's been, over many years, a 1 in 4 campaign. 1 in 4 people experience mental health problems in the course of their lives. And it really irritates me because what it doesn't say is how that is skewed. That it's skewed towards people from lower social classes, people that live in poverty. So, what is needed? Loving, understanding, and compassionate approaches, a belief in people and a belief in the community, a values-based approach, and I'm sure we've all heard of the recovery approach in mental health, which I think is one of the best things that's happened in mental health services for many years. And we can find a lot of values in the recovery approach, including hope and including helping people to find new opportunities. But we also need a rights-based approach, promoting equality in a very unequal society in which we live. And we need to help people to gain positive life experiences. So there's never been a better time to bring about significant change. And if we aim for these qualities in our work today, I believe we can transform mental health care forever. And that's the end of my talk.
Thank you very much, Theo, for that really wonderful talk and that fantastic musical interlude, which I think we all enjoyed. So we have a couple of minutes for questions. If anybody has a question, if they could raise their hand, Brian is going around with a roving mic and he'll be able to take your question, and Theo will be happy to answer. Okay, Brian down the front here.
Brian, there's a gentleman here. There's not even enough room for Brian to walk along, is there?
They have to be this side.
You have legs, Brian.
Just talking to him. Well, yeah, I think we need to be more radical. I think we need to call a spade a spade. And I think, you know, as we do in the UK, we live in one of the most unequal societies on the planet. You know, and I think we need to begin to acknowledge the truth of inequality. And if inequality is not on your radar, then it should be. Anybody who's working in mental health. And I think we should speak out at every opportunity to challenge inequalities that exist and to argue and to fight for people that have fewer rights, whether that's political or economic. And I respect you for the work you do. I mean, I don't know, you know, if I can say any more than that. Practically, I know what I've done over the years. The YouTube clip gives you a hint, doesn't it? It's the first time I've watched that and not cried.
Oh.
You know, the first time I watched it, you know, tears just streamed down my face. I thought, what on earth is that about? And, you know, my guess is that I probably sound very middle class to you guys. I don't know, do I?
No.
But, you know, well, I am. Damn it.
I don't know.
And I love the arts. I engage with everything and anything I can in Nottingham. And I'm not anti what you're talking about. I'm very much pro what you're talking about as well. It's just, to be honest, I've spent the last 20 years of my life on the side of the people being disadvantaged and disenfranchised and disempowered. And actually, you know, I mean, I remember a young black man, and I went to diagnosed with schizophrenia, and I went to a museum with him. And he was scared, literally scared to go in. And I said, why? He said, do you think they want people like me in there? You know, I do need to come clean on that. You know, because I've given a polemic this evening, and I trained as a therapist, you know, so I'm not anti-therapy at all. And I've the utmost respect for people that conduct arts therapies. And in our Arts on Prescription programme, a lot of our artists are people that have trained in arts therapies. It's just we don't do art therapy. But I have the utmost respect. I think the only thing with art therapy, historically, it's been very limited for, you know, just a few people for those sessions. And I guess I'm much more interested in communities and, you know, lots of people benefiting. I toyed with including target-driven culture in my talk, and I only left it out because I was including too much. But I totally agree with you, and I just find it so disheartening. And it's not just in healthcare, is it? I think in education, in any public service, there's similar cultures that are being created where the meeting targets becomes paramount. I think there is a groundswell. Can I say a groundswell of backlash? Certainly in the UK about when target-driven culture becomes counterproductive, and certainly a lot of thinking people. I don't know what else to say really. I'm committed to a values-driven model of mental health care, and and I guess we all are we not? I think what you're alluding to is one of the most important things. I mean, my experience is that arts in health will get funded when there are certain people in the right place that believe in it. It's absolutely nothing to do with evidence. It's just an excuse. And I do argue for a common sense approach. Your common sense tells you, actually, you do something creative with somebody, they're going to feel better. So I would argue for a common sense approach to mental health care. I really would, based on human values, not on targets, not on the medical model, and certainly not on recommendations from pharmaceutical companies. Well, I mean, I argue, and I believe you me, I've been in this situation a number of times, and I argue what I've argued tonight, that we're talking. You see, it's like, in the Cold War, I think this is the best way to think about it. The Cold War, East and West, yeah? They just couldn't even talk. And in a way, I think it's very, very similar, that there are, it's about philosophy. I mean, I don't know if I dare mention religion, but it's a bit like Protestants and Catholics, yeah? Your belief systems are different. And it's very rare. Occasionally you get mixed marriages, or you get some, empathic, understanding people that are able to think across these boundaries. But often, and I'm not blaming the medics, because they've been trained in certain ways. And I don't know, I can think of our medical school, and things are changing nowadays, but I can think in our medical school, correct me if I'm right, Siobhan, there's one of my ex-students there. You could tell they medical students from 100 yards. They dressed differently, they held themselves differently. That was before they started putting stethoscopes around their necks. I'm a doctor. Oh. And they're all very posh as well at Nottingham. And the point I'm making, I don't want to take the mickey out of doctors. The point I'm making is that it is a different philosophy. It is East meets West, it's Catholic, it's Protestant. There are some, I would say, enlightened medics that kind of make a leap and say, yeah, but, if I was ill like that, I would want music. If I was ill like that, I would want someone to come and read poetry to me. Yeah? They join up the dots. And it's almost as if there's this positivist way of thinking that forgets what it means to be a human being. So I would use the same argument. Invariably, they always win the argument, and that's because hard-nosed positivists do, because they've got everything on their side. They've got the law, they've got the DSM-5, they've got, everything on their side. But that doesn't mean I'm going to stop arguing. I'm going to argue for the rest of my days. If you want to email me, I'll send you the whole report with all the answers to the questions. I've got an executive summary. but I've also got a research article here you can have. I brought one of each of my mental health. So if you're interested in any of aspects of, I've got a study here on people who are inpatients engaging with the arts as well. But in short, we've run it outside of the health service in a community arts programme in the community, in relationship with colleges as well, to help people move through education if they want to. Funding is a nightmare. I've done a lot of begging, but I've done no borrowing or stealing. To be honest, it's a nightmare. Yeah, in short. I'm sorry, I've got no pearls of wisdom there. But on that note, 2 books for sale, €25 each, and I'll write a little message in.
Thank you all for attending.